So without further ado, I'd like to welcome back for the third time at Mainframe. He is a Mainframe stay, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. Robert, man, we got to put you on the payroll, man.
Chuck, it's a real honor to be asked back here. I love what you're doing. I've met so many interesting people on this on at the Mainframe Comic Con, and I have to say I very much am anticipating this conversation because I have been a fan of this next guest for 4 decades, I think.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you guys about the first time I ever saw him in a movie, which I think was the first movie he was ever in that I think I must have watched 100 times, and it was not Batman.
Okay, well, I don't want to take up any more of your time, so go ahead, introduce your guest, guys. I'll see you back here a little bit later on today with an Nosferatu panel. Robert?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am so excited to talk to this next guest, an actor who has a storied 4-decade career. He's been in such great movies. Ron Shelton's Bull Durham, one of the great sports movies of all time. He also appeared in Mr. Shelton's Blaze. Then he was Super Agent Arliss Michaels in a show that took us from the end of the 20th century into the 21st century. We also know him, of course, the only man that probably ever got a grant from Bruce Wayne himself, reporter Alexander Knox in Tim Burton's 1989 Batman, which sort of changed the face of comic book movies forever. So without further ado, please, put your hands together, hoist your beer, whatever you're doing, for Mr. Robert Wuhl.
Hello.
Sir, it is so great to speak with you. And since I've got you in front of me, I've got to say, when I was a kid, well, not really a kid, teenager, the first movie I recorded off cable was The Hollywood Knights.
Yeah.
I think I watched it 100 times, and I never got tired of it. And you were also in a film that I think is one of the great movies ever made about filmmaking, which is Mistress. And the first time I ever saw it, a girlfriend of mine gave it to me on Laserdisc.
Mm-hmm.
And it is such a great honor to speak with you. And you've had such an interesting career. You've worked with so many great people. Of course, in Mistress, Martin Landau and you got to work with Paul Newman in Blaze, of course, Batman, and the Hollywood Knights had a crazy cast as well. Michelle Pfeiffer in an early role. So I guess how did you get into acting? How did you begin this great career of yours?
I'll tell you, I knew I was going to be, I wanted to be in the entertainment business as a very young child. I loved looking at the movie page. I just loved it. I liked looking at the movie page. And I watched a lot of movies. I always wanted to be, most likely on the other side of the camera. I loved the whole part of it. I loved comics, and I loved comedians and watching old black and white movies. I learned a lot. I learned how to act from good actors. I learned comedy from good comedians and good comic actors. But I always wanted to do it. And then I studied, I was in drama class in high school, never got cast. No one ever cast me.
Really?
And then, yeah, no, I was never cast. I was the cut up. And then I was cast. I went to college, University of Houston. We had a very good drama department with one of the all-time great teachers, a guy named Cecil Pickett. And in my class, it was me, Brett Cullen, who played Thomas Wayne in The Joker just recently, and Dennis Quaid. Randy was there a couple of years before me. We had some great people. Billy Stritch, a great musician, and Cindy Pickett. Was her we had great drama class. So I learned a lot there. And again, they didn't cast me too much, but I learned enough that I learned a lot. I learned a lot. When they did cast me, it went well. And but I had, I started as a stand-up comic. So because I thought that was a way to show my act. I could write and show an act, and then perform the act. So that's how I started pretty much.
Now, how long, obviously, acting with people like Robin Williams, who began as a comic as well, I've always thought that comedians have an interesting command of, you can pretty much do anything with a comic background. You can play drama, you can do comedy. Was that something, like, obviously The Hollywood Knights being one of your first films, which is, it's a very funny body comedy. Did your comedic stand-up background help you score that role?
Absolutely, 100%.
As Newbaum?
100%, because Floyd Mutrux, the writer-director, he had Harriet Hellberg was the casting director, who was married to Sandy Hellberg, who played Officer Clark in the movie The Skinny Cop, and is the father of Simon, and is the mother and father of Simon Hellberg from The Big Bang Theory, who can buy and sell all of us. But she brought me in to see. I was a young comic, just came out to California. I don't think I'm out 2 months, and she brought me in to meet Floyd Mutrux, and I improvised. I mean, 90% of the Hollywood Nights dialogue, the dialogue is improvised, not really the storyline, but the dialogue is improvised, which is a difference. I mean, that's when you learn about screenwriting. With the great William Goldman would say, screenplays are structure. So when people say, "Oh, what great dialogue, what a great screenplay," well, no, screenplays are structure. And he's right. And that's how I got it. I improvised. I did a bunch of the jokes that wound up in the movie. The man with the 5 penises fits like a glove, that kind of stuff, which is a joke my father used to tell. And no, that's totally. Now, I had a big acting background, though. I had a great theater background, so I'm not like a lot of comics who only came from comedy. To me, I always saw comedy differently also. Growing up on movies and comedy movies, I did not see. I looked at it, and a theater background, I looked at the two masks of drama. To me, it was all drama. And you have the two masks of drama, you have comedy and tragedy. But to me, there were two sides of the same coin. But however, there are people who, if you can do comedy, acting-wise, you can do drama. Not necessarily the other way around. I'll bet on any comedian, a good comedian, will give a good dramatic performance. You've seen it time and time and time, whether it's Robin, whether it's Red Buttons, whether excuse me, whether it was Red Buttons, whether it was, how many? I mean, I can go down the list here. Tom Hanks was Jack Lemmon started as a you can go on and on. Not necessarily the other way around. Some people just aren't funny. They, as Neil Simon said, they don't hear the music.
Now, you said you watched a lot of movies and growing up. Who were some of your touchstones? Who were the people that you admired and learned from?
Well, first of all, the filmmakers. I mean, Billy Wilder, Howard Hawks, Hitchcock, John Ford. They were the filmmakers first. William Wyler, of course, which is most people don't know who William Wyler is these days. They were the film. Then you had the actors and the greats. You start with Cary Grant. To me, you start with Cary Grant. I love John Wayne movies. I love John Wayne movies.
Sure. Did you have a favorite John Wayne movie?
Off the top of my head, I mean, there's a lot of. Off the top of my head, the one I watch more than any other is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
So good.
But I loved William Holden. There's a lot of actors who I can always watch. Fred McMurray could be a great asshole. He was played a great asshole. There's a lot. Then the women. Carol Lombard is a great comic actress. Myrna Loy is a great comic actress. William Powell. The most underappreciated actress in the history of Hollywood, I would argue, is Doris Day. The most underappreciated, not the best, the most underappreciated. This is a woman who was a band singer. She was a band singer, and she became the #1 box office star for 10 straight years. Now, let's put this in perspective. It would be as if Katy Perry was the #1 box office attraction for 10 straight years, and worked with people like Hitchcock and James Cagney, another favorite, in Love or Leave 'Em. And she worked with, Que Sera Sera, and then she does all these great movies with Rock Hudson and James Garner. James Garner's another one. They're not good. They're great. They were nominated for Oscars. People, make fun of like Pillow Talk and Lover Come Back and The Thrill of It All. Thrill of It All is written by Carl Reiner, directed by Norman Jewison. That is a great movie. The other two were nominated for Oscars, or I think Pillow Talk won an Oscar for screenplay. So Doris Day to me is the most underappreciated movie star of all time. But there's a bunch of them I love. Then came the next wave: Pacino, Nicholson, De Niro. Who like you mentioned, Mistress, and I got to work with a bunch of them.
The cast in that film is incredible.
Phenomenal. It's because it was Tribeca's first film. It was Tribeca's first film, and Barry Primus had been a longtime friend of Robert, still is, And he had this script for a long time, pretty much a script, follows Barry's story. And I mean, so he pulled every favor he could, and I got to meet Martin Landau, and I got to work with him and De Niro and Danny Aiello and Eli Wallach and Cheryl Lee Ralph and Gene Smart and Christopher Walken, and it goes on, and it was the most fun and the best part and the best performance of my life goes to Barry. That's my best. If I had to pick one performance that I say no, that's the one I feel best about. It's Mistress.
Well, it's such a great. Well, it's such a great film about filmmaking.
Laurie Metcalf played the wife.
Yeah. It's just, you watch that film, and I have to tell you, I wasn't aware of it. And my friend Mary Forrest, she gave me the Laserdisc, and she's like, you have to watch this movie. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, how did I not see this film? Because there's sort of a whole subgenre of movies about movie making. And that's right up there with the best of them. And your performance, so good.
A couple of things about that movie, pros and cons. I love the movie. Somebody suggested that one of the producers thought if they would have cut all the scenes with me and the wife, which was it might have been a better commercial movie, but then I would have lost Laurie Metcalf. But I didn't. It wasn't my movie. I didn't write it. I was strictly cast as an actor. The thing about the movie is most film students, when film students talk to me about movies who've gone to school, the movie they bring up a lot is Mistress, because that's going to be their experience more than these other big budget type of things. Trying to get money for an independent movie and having guys who will put in money if you put their girlfriend or mistress in the movie, that is, that they're going to go through that. The negative was we were, timing is everything. And we came out about a month after The Player. And The Player also was about the movie industry. And okay, now The Player to me is a good piece, and I love Altman. That's another influence. But I loved and I liked him personally. He was a friend. But I have to say, The Player, in my opinion, is great when it's talking about the movie business and it's fun goofing on the movie. But the plot about a studio executive who's going to kill a screenwriter because he wants to go with his wife, that's out of Columbo. I mean, that's a plot out of Columbo. And by the way, did you ever believe that Whoopi Goldberg and Lyle Lovett were policemen? No. What made it work were the goofy cameos about the movie industry and the amazing opening shot. The amazing
with Buck Henry. With Buck Henry in it.
With everybody. And my friend Tim Robbins, of course. And that's the greatness of that movie. But as far as the actual storyline, it's like, Mistress is actually about making a movie.
And it's more realistic. I mean, having been a filmmaker myself, it's really close to home.
I've been there.
Well, since you talked about Tim Robbins, I've got to ask, because I just recently rewatched it. Criterion put it out on Blu-ray. They remastered Bull Durham. And I believe that was Ron Shelton's first film as a director. It is, I think, one of the great movies about sports ever made. Again, the cast is terrific. Could you talk a little bit about how did you get involved with that? And was it as much fun to film as it was to watch?
Yes. Okay. I got cast giving the worst to Ron Shelton. Said it was the single worst audition he ever saw. The casting director apologized to her for bringing me in.
Come on.
Apologized to him for bringing me in. And Ron Shelton said, that's the worst audition I've ever seen. Hire him immediately. Because what happened was the character only had about 3 or 4, maybe 5 lines in the whole movie, in the script. Didn't have much. And so I had just finished Good Morning Vietnam and become friendly with the late, very great Bruno Kirby. And I called Bruno, who was as smart about acting about anybody I ever knew. And I said, what's the key to this character here? He doesn't have much here. And I talked to him and he said something. He said, it seems to me in the minor leagues, there's not a staff. There's a manager and a pitching coach. If the manager rises up through the ranks, more than likely he's taking his pitching coach with him. So that hooked me into, okay, he's a yes man. That's all I needed to know. So when I went in for the audition, I just started going and doing all my hum baby hum, because my dad was a ball player. And so I did all the stuff that ball players do. You know, hum baby, nobody here, nobody here. I could do all that chatter. And whatever the manager said, I just said, yeah, that's right, that's right. So I was all over the place, but it was exactly the color that he was looking for. He said, I know what everybody else is going to do. He goes, Robert's going to give me a color that I can always, if I'm get stuck in a scene, I can go to him. And that's how that came about. Now, was it as much fun to do? Yes, except for it was cold. Yes, because we was a bunch of guys, basically, with a few women, Susan and Ms. Roberts, Jenny, but it was cold some nights. You can see when we're on the mountain, you see our breath. You know, it's cold. But yes, it was great fun. And also, a little known fact is, you know, everybody had to be able to play ball. Ron actually who was a ball player. Remember, Ron Shelton was a minor league ball player. He wanted to look authentic, and he actually had 1 week of camp before we started shooting, and he actually replaced the first baseman because he couldn't play ball. What was interesting is the guy who played shortstop on the team was a former minor league player in the San Diego Padres system who didn't make it, and then he went into show business, and he could do impressions, which Ron wanted to do. When we went to each of the minor league parks, we shot a lot of this guy doing impressions, because when you went to minor league parks, there was always a promotion of some kind.
Right.
You know, this guy could do incredible impressions, and his name was Danny Gans. And he plays the shortstop, and he then became the king of Las Vegas. He became the man of 1,000 voices, and the highest paid entertainer, higher than Wayne Newton, higher than all of them at the time, was Danny Gans. And unfortunately, he died much too young.
Now, before you did Bull Durham, you mentioned Good Morning Vietnam, a wonderful film, obviously. What was that like, and how did you get cast, and what was it like to watch Robin Williams work? Did they just wind him up and let him go, or did he stay on script?
No, that's a misnomer. That's a misunderstanding. I knew Robin because we all started out in the clubs together, and so I knew Robin from about 77.
Wow.
Yeah, about 77, 78, and before Mork hit. So we were friendly. So it was great to have a friend there. He knew we had mutual respect. He respected my work, and we knew each other. I mean, we were friendly. We were friends. So having me there was a little bit of security. He didn't need me, but I mean, it was at least somebody you know. You're on the other side of the world.
Sure.
And and the reason I got that one also, Barry Levinson had seen me work, and he always liked my stand-up act. And I had auditioned for Diner and didn't get it. I had auditioned for him 2 or 3 times for the pilot of Diner. I auditioned he did a show with Alan Arkin, a TV series. I didn't get that. But when it came time for Good Morning Vietnam, he had a part for me. So, and that was great fun. And Robin, there was a script. I mean, again, it's screenplay. Screenplays are structure. Robin, you give, and it was the perfect, when I read the screenplay, I said, this is going to work. You know, you can tell, not all the time, but sometimes you knew, I go, this is the right vehicle for Robin Williams. This is a drama with humor. Do you know, it's like, because it is a drama, but because, there's a difference between, this is the structure and the story of the drama was good, and it allowed the framework, being a DJ, then he can go off and do anything. The framework was just there, and he did. And it was great. I mean, it was hot. It was hot in Thailand, but it was great.
Well, now, being that this is the Mainframe Comic Con, I know that people want to hear about, Tim Burton's Batman, which is now, it's 31 years old, and it sort of was the beginning. I mean, sure, there was Superman the movie in 1978, but Tim Burton's Batman in 89 sort of changed the playing field when it came to superhero films and what they could be, and the fact that you had an A-list cast of which you were part of. Nicholson obviously is the Joker and Michael Keaton is Batman. You had Tim Burton stepping up his game, Anton Furst designing the movie. How did you get cast in that? And what was it like working on those sets and experiencing the production of that film?
It looks terrible. What was it like? It was great. Everything Batman is, that's a memory. And I was old enough to appreciate it too, because I was in Batman, and so I was about 36, 37. And so I was old enough to appreciate what was going on here, which is a wonderful thing to be able to do. What happened was the casting director on that one was Marion Dougherty. Marion Dougherty is the legend of casting directors. She started the casting director business. And
she found James Dean.
Yeah, I mean, she found it. I mean, she gave Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman their first jobs, So I met Marion Dowdy, and she was a fan of my work. She liked my comedy. She came and saw me in the clubs, and she had me audition for a couple of things. She had me come in to meet George Roy Hill for Garp to play, audition for Garp. Not that I was ever going to get it. They were going with Robin Williams, but she liked my work. And when Batman, she had me come in to meet with her to read for Knox, and then she had me meet Tim Burton for Knox. And then Tim Burton, I got him into an advanced showing of Bull Durham. And then Tim told me I had the part, which was like, this is, and it was London. I mean, come on. I mean, Batman, okay, let's talk Batman. Batman is so special. I mean, I was in London for 4 months during Christmas season, so it's Charles Dickensville.
Right.
And I had my wife with me, and for a lot of it, for most of it. And then we would bring around, when you're on Batman per diem, that's good per diem. So I wound up getting this great 2-bedroom apartment, and we had friends come over. Her mom came over. I mean, everybody had the greatest time. And then you'd go and then you're actually working with the best of the best of the best. I mean, you gotta remember at that point, Batman is the most expensive movie ever made in Hollywood. And you're working with Jack Nicholson, and he's kind enough to let me ride home with him and tell it. And there's no raconteurs like Jack. Jack will tell you stories about everything. He's telling me stories about coking up Princess Margaret. I mean, there's nobody like Jack. And then Michael. Now, Michael I had known because Michael was a comic.
Right.
Michael had started out as a comedian. And what's interesting is I think back that had there been social media back then, Michael Keaton is never Batman. Because I remember the shit hitting the fan when they announced Michael Keaton as Batman. I remember that. And in today's society, it would be magnified a trillionfold.
Yeah, because it wouldn't have been pretty.
Mr. Mom is playing Batman? I mean, now I knew Michael, and I knew how good an actor he was. And if you saw a movie called Clean and Sober, when Michael played this drug addict, you knew how dark he could get. The public really didn't. Now, the other point of this is all Tim Burton. This is Tim Burton. You mentioned Anton Furst, by the way, walking out to the set at Pinewood Studios, which is the James Bond studios, and they took it over for Batman, and seeing the design was like, oh boy, this is going to work. Now, I have to tell you, I was not a fan of the Adam West Batman TV series at all. It was much too jokey and campy for me. Much too jokey and campy for me. So this was darker. This was going to be darker. But it's interesting because Tim Burton and the producers, John Peter and Peter Guber, had slightly different visions of this movie. Now remember, Tim Burton is not Tim Burton at this point. He's only done 2 movies. He's done Pee-wee and he's done Beetlejuice. Both successful movies for Warner Brothers, though.
But very quirky. Not necessarily who you would pick to.
I mean, if I could think of the greatest piece of casting probably of all time, it's Tim Burton on Batman. But I once asked, John Peters, the producer, if you didn't go with, if it hadn't been Michael, who were you thinking? You know what they were saying? You know what the replies were? Steve Martin or Bill Murray. Okay, so this gives you an idea.
Wow. So they
were going much jokier. They were going to go much more that way. It's all Tim Burton. So, and Tim fought a lot. Tim didn't want Prince's songs in the movie. He didn't want them. It's like, but he had no clout. I mean, Prince had just scored a huge hit for Warner Brothers in Purple Rain. He was the biggest music star in the world. They had him under contract, and they were going to have his songs. They were back in their bets. As it turned out, it kind of works, so it's okay.
Yeah.
But at the time, I mean, and again, that's Tim Burton, and making that work.
Was he? When you guys were doing this, obviously going from Pee-wee's Big Adventure to Beetlejuice, which are very distinctly, obviously Tim Burton's sensibilities really define the film. And when you get to Batman, like you said, it was one of the most expensive movies ever made at the time. And having Peter Guber and John Peters producing this film that had a different vision, was Tim Burton able to assert himself, and was he able to?
He probably got about 90% of what he wanted, 90% of what he wanted. What was weird was when they changed I remember we went in with a very solid script by Sam
Ham.
Sam
Yeah.
Ham. And I read, and then Warren came aboard, Warren Scarron, who was a great guy. He did a draft, but about halfway through shooting, suddenly Warren was called back in from Texas, and he couldn't figure out what. And what had happened was Jack and John Peters had gone to see Phantom of the Opera, which had just opened up in London. Huge hit, mammoth hit, obviously. It's still a big hit now. Can you imagine what it was 30 years ago?
Yeah.
And when it came to that final third act, with the Phantom and everything else on top of the deal, they said, that's what we need in the movie. And suddenly they told Tim, we're rewriting the third act. And I was like, what? And so, so that was Jack and John Peters. And then they brought Warren back. Warren couldn't believe he was coming back for this. Look, it worked.
Yeah.
However, I have a theory about all this. Is that okay? Well, I'm going to separate the two incarnations of the movie Batman's. Okay, we'll take the before 2000 and then the Dark Knight series. Okay, because I think it's before 2000 when the Joel Schumacher thing ends.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we'll take them in different forms because they're different generations. If you took the first incarnation, what was there, 5 movies?
There's 4. The Warner's.
Batman
Returns, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin.
Okay, right. Okay, if you took those 4, let's say there's 8 hours. If you put them end to end to end to end, every hour gets progressively worse. I really think so. I mean, to the point where the last one's unwatchable. I mean, it's just unwatchable. But the first hour of the first movie is about as good as it gets. The second hour, pretty good, pretty damn good. The next one is, for my taste, is good and then not so good. I don't like, and then after that, it just goes into the toilet. I mean, after that, Joel Schumacher, who would have been the sensibilities that what you see is the sensibilities. That's what Batman would have been if it wasn't for Tim Burton.
Sure.
That's what it would have been. And what's interesting is when Batman 89 comes out, when the distributors saw it, they were terrified because they had booked away and they thought it was too dark. They were terrified. It was much too dark. People now are so used to that Batman signal, that the famous logo. When they first put that logo out on over here on Wilshire Boulevard, and they had nothing else, just the logo, people had a hard time seeing what it was.
Yeah.
It was an optical illusion a little bit of what am I looking at here? Until you go, oh yeah, now I get it. So, in hindsight, and of course now you have a different generation with the Dark Knight, which is a totally a different take from a different generation, and a generation who, when I was teaching a class in New Jersey at film school, I asked the class about 7-8 years ago. I said, why is it seems every other movie is about the apocalypse now? It just seems every other movie, 5 movies a month come out about the apocalypse. I said, what is this thing about the apocalypse? And they said something very interesting. He said, our generation all grew up after 9/11. And so the apocalypse is not something that, being it's darker, because I know not a lot of today's generation, the people who grew up, which is understandable, everything is generational. They find Jack Nicholson very campy and very jokey. Where at the time, he had humor, but it was fun. It was great. I mean, he was great, but to a different generation, different sensibilities. I get it. Personally, my feeling is, like you've heard how I feel about the first Batmans already. The one thing I will say about Batman 89, which I do not, as much as I respect the Dark Knight series, why it doesn't speak to me at all, there are 2 reasons. One is they're all too long. Every one of them are too long. They're just too long. But the other one is, and it's a different take. Batman 89 was dark for its time, but it was also fun. Batman 89 is fun.
It is fun.
I don't find any fun in the Dark Knight series. There's no fun. See, to me,
Yeah, I mean, it's very, in a way, I completely understand where you're coming from. It's very.
I'll tell you, I'm not. That's not saying it's better or worse. To me, it's just not as much fun. By the way, and the worst of the Dark Knight series is better than all the rest of the Batmans. I mean, those last two Joel Schumacher shit.
Sure.
Anyway, I shouldn't speak badly of Joel.
Well, you know, the movie also had, I really loved, like you said, Michael Keaton would have been destroyed on social media, but the fact that Tim Burton cast him and saw that was unique. And I think overall, the entire cast of that movie was eclectic, and everybody brought a different flavor to it. You certainly did. And you had great scenes with Kim Basinger, who I think is one of the great, even today, even though she's been nominated for an Academy Award, you know, in LA Confidential and things like that, she's one of the great unsung screen actresses of the modern age. I mean, she debuted in Never Say Never Again, the Bond film. What was it like working with her, and how was that relationship? And did she dig it? Did she like being in the film?
Yeah, I'm sure she did. How could it not? She's okay. How's that for an
And then you had Alfred. Mike
got there, and within a week she'd separate for her husband and moved in with John Peters. Is that enough said?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
And at least you got to give it up for John Peters. I mean, you know.
Oh yeah, listen, John Peters. Listen, John Peters, and you cannot make. What is this?
I think that was an ad.
Oh, okay.
We're supposed to go for an hour, right? Not a half an hour?
I think so.
But so it was a great experience for you. You know, when the movie came out, I have to say, I was in college. I was at
sorry guys, that was my bad. Technical difficulties in the live end. As you are, yeah, you got as much time as you want.
Oh, okay,
Thanks,
good. So when the movie came out, I was in film school. I was going to USC. We actually we stole a bunch of bus station Batman posters. Terrible. Sure. I know we shouldn't have done that. But the excitement around that film coming out, it opened June 19th. I actually went to the premiere in Westwood. And I sat in Jack Nicholson's row, and the hype and the excitement about that film was enormous. I mean, it was just enormous. And when it's coming out, like when you work on a movie, whether it's Bull Durham or Good Morning Vietnam, obviously when actors come and they do their work and then they have to go, and it might be a year and a half before you get to see the film. What was it like for you in the run up to the film's release? Were you at all aware that it was going to be the phenomenon that it was? And had you seen did Tim Burton allow you to see it? And what was it like for you seeing it for the first time?
It was extremely exciting. What I remember, they allowed me to stand in the back of a theater when they were showing the trailer for the first time before an audience.
And there were great trailers too.
When you came up, I'm Batman, and call me Joker. I mean, the place was going crazy, and I said, "Oh boy, well, this is going to be a big hit. This is a game changer." Now that said, I went to a screening of it about a week before it opened, and it was pretty dark for a lot of people. They weren't expecting, and this is an older audience too at the time. This was not a younger audience, and I think, and Batman did not get universally great reviews, by the way.
Right.
I mean, Roger Ebert didn't. Batman did not, get universally great reviews. But I had a bet with a studio executive who was working at Columbia at the time, and they had, I believe, Ghostbusters 2 came out just beforehand.
Yeah, it did. Yep.
And so we had a bet going, which was going to make more money. And he said, Batman won't do $100 million. And I said, I bet it does. And then afterwards, he reneged, saying, "Well, I meant $100 million in film rentals." I go, "I don't give a shit what graphic you put onto it. It did it." I said, I don't care how you break down the formula, what computations you use, it did it. So, and he's never repaid. He's never paid. But yeah, it was To this day, it's still it's so generational, and it's like, it's still Batman. It's something that's going to be around forever.
Absolutely. Now, there's a lot of talk. We live in the world of the streaming world now, and HBO Max has joined the fray, and you had one of the longest running cable shows in Arliss. It was a really long running show. It had a huge fan base. What was it like, and is doing a series different than films? And when you're front and center, I mean, you're playing the titular character. What's that like for you as an actor? Is there extra added pressure? And how did you like that experience?
I loved it. I mean, Arliss was my show. I mean, I got to create it. I got to, I got to control it. I got to be in it. I got to direct it. I mean, I loved telling stories. I mean, that was the greatest. I mean, and working with the people I worked with, and having these great people around me, and getting to pick and tell stories. I mean, I got to tell stories. You mentioned Bull Durham. You say it's one of the best sports movies. Fran Lebowitz, the great author, very acerbic New York writer, once came up to me at a party and said, she was chain smoking, "I hate sports, but I love your show." And I said, well, because it's not about sports.
Right.
It's about characters in the world of sports. That's something totally different. Your best sports movies, in my opinion, don't come down to the big game. That's why most of them suck. It comes down to the big game. And as Ron Shelton says, there are no big games, maybe once in a blue moon. It's about behavior. Movies are about characters. Movies are about characters. Bull Durham has no big game. And in fact, the scene in the mound with the candlesticks line, the studio wanted to cut the whole scene out because they said it didn't move the plot. And Ron Shelton said, "What plot? There is no plot in this movie." So the only reason it stayed in was because when they did the focus groups, it was always the first or second favorite scene in the movie. So they're about characters. And so I felt that way about Arliss. I was just telling a story about a guy who ran a business. My father had a business. We had a family business. So to me, it was no different than anything else. He was an agent, which is parasitic by nature because you're taking a percentage of somebody else's work, but you are doing a job for that. To me, it was no different than a real estate agent or a travel agent or a theatrical agent. He was an agent. The only difference is he had a very unique clientele. There were young men mostly, and women, who were very young, very successful, and only have a career for a very short period of time. So you have to maximize that thing. But other than that, it was a guy running a business. It was just about that. And it was never about numbers. And you can never say, "Oh, Arliss is going to make the biggest deal of all time." No, that's not emotional. Numbers aren't emotional. The great Billy Wilder always said, "Don't give me logic, give me emotion." It's about the characters. It was about having Jim Turner and Michael Boatman and finding Sandra Oh and picking her to play this part.
By the way, what a great coup that was. I mean, I've always loved her. She's just terrific. How did you find her? She was a Canadian. I mean, she'd come down and
she auditioned along with a lot of other people. And it came down to her and another actress. And I can tell you who the other actress is because she went on to a great career herself. That was Lauren Graham. And
oh, wow.
So I was in pretty good shape. So, and they said, "Who do you want?" And I said, "I want to go with Sandra because I'm not sure what I'm going to get. I like that. I like that. I'm not sure what." And in the first season, which is I always call our rookie season, you're basically trying to find out what kind of show you have, what people can do, what they can't do. It's just it's like any other ball club. So, right. And we found out what she could do, and she got, and more confidence everybody got, the better they got, and everybody's game was raised. And she's terrific.
When you're put in that kind of a position, obviously if you talk about your whole career coming from the stand-up world into the film world and doing a lot of television, when you're finally now calling the shots and it's basically your show, was there anything that surprised you from a production standpoint or a show running standpoint? Was there extra added pressure that you weren't necessarily prepared for, or was there a learning curve over the course of the seasons of Arliss for you?
Well, absolutely, it was a learning curve. I mean, that's just, that's in any job. I mean, it's like the second time you do something, you should be better than you did it the first time, and the third time you should be. You got to learn. I mean, that's anything. No extra pressure. The only pressure I had was they would say they're not concerned with ratings, but they sure as hell were.
Right.
We were always the stepchild there. We were never considered the hip show. We were always the stepchild because they had Sex and the City and they had The Sopranos and they had 6 Feet Under, which were all these she, very sexy shows. And we weren't. We were just telling. But as long as I was telling stories, and Chris Albrecht, who ran HBO, was a huge fan of mine. And he first put me on stage when he was the manager of the Improv. So he backed me totally. He knew I could deliver. And he also knew I came from a business background with my family. And that unlike every other HBO show that's ever been on the world, we came in on time and under budget every single
year. And that's a huge deal in television.
It depends who you are. It depends who you are. If you're the Sopranos, they didn't give a shit. If it was Sex and the City, they didn't give a shit. Yeah. It's like you can go over budget. When you're artless, I never gave him a chance to. Because I was always fighting to stay on the air. So, and we went up in the ratings every year, 7 years. Now, what I did do, here's what I learned. When they put me on after Sex and the City, I realized when we first went on, we had like 74% of the audience was male. Sports. By the time we ended, because following Sex and the City, my conduit to holding on as much of that audience as possible was Sandra. And I knew that. So I'm going to gear more stories towards her, make her more prominent. So by doing that, by the end of the Arliss reign, or the Arliss series, we were 53% women. And and by the way, 7 years, and we went up in the ratings every year for 7 years, which is very, very difficult to do. Not many shows ever do that. And the other thing was I could tell any story I wanted. And what was great was I went into social. I became darker too. The show becomes much darker. I mean, I was telling stories about domestic abuse, Alzheimer's, steroid abuse, gay athletes, bisexual athletes, drunk, alcoholic, unwanted pregnancies, you name it. We did a show about the Indian mascot. Recently, there's a great podcast I'll give a plug to called the George Lucas Talk Show, which is on Sunday afternoons. It's done by two of the guys from the Uptight Citizens Brigade. One pretends to be George Lucas, the other one's Watto. And they're great comic actors. But to raise money during the pandemic, they did they did a Star Wars live stream the whole day. They did Star Wars. And then they decided out of the blue, for some reason, to do Arliss. And so each Sunday they would live stream a season of Arliss. And they wound up, and they wanted me on, so I had to watch them. And I hadn't watched the episodes in about 15 years. And the one thing that struck all of us was how well they held up and the topics that we were doing, which were just as topical today with domestic abuse, steroid abuse, Alzheimer's, gay athletes, the Indian mascot. I mean, it was just, it held up. It really held up, because it was on HBO Max after not having it on for 15 years.
Do you think now with HBO Max that we might have an Arliss revival? Any chance of that? Has someone called you?
It has been mentioned. Again, I have to tell you, we were always a stepchild there.
Right.
HBO, we were always we weren't the hip series over there. And now it's getting this whole revisionist second look. But we had huge supporters. I mean, Neil Simon, the great David Milch once came up to me because we were getting hammered. We got hammered by critics. I mean, people either loved us or hated us. I mean, Fran Lebowitz, the New York Times loved us. Entertainment Weekly thought we were the worst show on TV. We were getting hammered. But now, and then David Milch came up to me one time and said, before he did Westworld, not Westworld, what did he do? He did Deadwood. And he said, Robert, he goes, I don't know if you know this, but you're changing TV. What you're doing, what the stories you're telling. And I said, look, I'm just trying to do a show here. They're letting me do it, so I'm doing it. So I had great David Halberstam, the great writer. I mean, Pete Hamill, who just passed. I had great people, for that. So that was wonderful.
Well, you've had a really, I think, an incredible career in show business, seeing it from many different angles. And I know that there's going to be a lot of, young people watching this interview. And I always ask people this: what advice? I mean, we live in a different world now with social media, but the idea of talent and performance and creating shows or movies or whatever, that really hasn't changed. I mean, it's changed in the age of COVID, but in terms of telling stories, what can you sort of give us in terms of advice over your long career that you could tell people starting out, or what are some of the pitfalls and things that maybe people don't know about? I mean, you hear some of the obvious things, but what are things that you've experienced that you think would help people to know if they want to pursue a career in show business?
Well, first of all, it's what okay. I will give you. I went to my friend Brian Cranston and I went to a ball game and last year, and the hostess of the club where we had lunch said, "I'm an aspiring actress. What advice would you have for me?" And Brian, as he would, sat her down. He said, "Okay, here's the first question. How much do you love it? How much do you love it? Do you love it enough to give up anything else? Do you love it more than you love the idea of having a family? Do you love it more than the idea of, he goes, because that's what it's going to take. It doesn't mean you can't have a family. It doesn't mean that you can't, but how much do you love it more than you love your boyfriend? You have to love it because it's too easy to get out of it. There's too many other people. That is not the passion. You have to have the passion for the work and for the art. Forget all the other bullshit. Forget the money, forget all the fame and everything else. The work. I mean, you have to love what you're doing. Now, as far as making a career out of it, it's totally different. I mean, it's different. Every generation is different. What's different now, of course, is that the distribution is different now, of course, with streaming. And who knows what movies are going to be. I think eventually there will be movies in theaters, but not that it wasn't going that way anyway, but it's even going to be less for, the demographic in movies went from being like from 12 to 24. I mean, when I started, it was like the big demographic was like 18 to 35. That was the big demographic, right? But but again, that's still now we're talking, early, we're talking early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. Now, when I grew up, it was different because you had adult movies. You didn't have that. That was not the key demographic at all, which is why you had adult movies. I mean, when you look at a year like, what was it, 72? What year was when you had Chinatown or whatever it was, when you had Godfather?
That was a little later, but yeah, Godfather was 72 and 74.
Yeah, 72. Like 76 when you had Network and Taxi Driver and All the President's Men and all. So those were adult movies.
Rocky.
Right. They're not really made that much anymore because that's not the demographic. The one thing that has changed recently is because there's no movie theaters. The demographic, I believe, has changed because who goes to the movie theaters are young people, understandably. They're all in school. They figure out what movie we're going to see. It's a social event. We're going to go see movies on Friday night. What are we going to see Friday? What are we going to see this weekend? Well, that's changed. That's totally changed for the most part because now you're at home and people are watching, and adults, older audiences are watching. They're streaming The West Wing. They're streaming Breaking Bad. It used to be like I just did The Princess Bride. I was part of that Princess Bride thing that Jason Reitman just did. I don't know. I was part of that, and that's on Quibi. So, and that's very short things. Well, it's interesting because that was always the game plan. The goal was the thinking. The model was people's attention spans are getting so less that 5 minutes is long enough. Interestingly enough, with the pandemic, people are home. They wound up streaming 5 or 6 seasons of stuff.
Right.
So the business model kind of changed right there. And you're seeing more adult. Now, it's going to go back as soon as from the studio point of view. It's going to go back because the younger demographic is the one that goes to the theaters on Friday. But for the time being, I mean, like the #1 movie on demand has been my friend Rod Lurie's movie, The Outpost.
Right, which is, by the way, outstanding.
So I'll tell him he said so. Thanks. So that's changed, but that's temporary. So as far as storytelling, watch, learn. Look, you got to speak to your audience, and speak to yourself. Write what you know, first of all. I knew something about business. I knew something about sports, and I knew human behavior. So that's where all this comes from. I did a history thing on HBO where they allowed me to. I went to 2 NYU classes, and I actually gave a history monologue called "Assume the Position," and I got to do these history which were incredibly well received. I got nominated for a Writers Guild Award, which I was grateful for. But I knew history, and I like being a teacher. So, and I got to curse on HBO, and kids love when you curse in the classroom. If you curse in the classroom, you're the cool teacher. So, but write what you know, but you have to be passionate. You really got to be passionate about it. Learn craft. Learn craft. That's what I would say. Learn structure. And structure is not easy to come by. I learned it when I did Police Squad. I started when I had auditioned for the Zucker brothers when they were doing Airplane, and I didn't get the part. They came and saw me, but later when they did Police Squad, they hired me to be a writer, and I learned more about structure on that show than anywhere else. And then I really got into reading William Goldman's books and learn structure. Of course, structure nowadays, everything changes. Everything. It's the great line from one of my favorite authors, philosophers, and hallucinogenic takers, Aldous Huxley, who once said, "The charm of history lies in the fact that from age to age, nothing changes, and yet everything is completely different." And that's about it.
Well, also we have, what I think is really interesting, the rise of YouTube has given people the ability to stream. There's comedy shows, there's all kinds of things, and you've got this worldwide distribution network where you can put your stuff up, for free. By the way, somebody wrote in, Not Near Mint says, "I was the kid in the 90s that loved Robert Wuhl as a teacher. I really did learn a lot from him. Thank you."
Well, I appreciate that. It was just a different way to look at stuff. It was just to look at, I think most things are generational. Basic things don't change. Basic motives don't change. It's usually the reason most decisions are made, big decisions, are either money, sex, or religion. It's always, my God is better than yours. What's in it for me, or who's got the hots for who? Most decisions are based upon that in some way, shape, or form. And I was showing through history how history is pop culture. How pop culture just didn't start in the 2000s. Pop culture has been going on forever, and history pop culture becomes history. And I use the quote from Liberty Valance, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
Yep.
And that's what it was based on.
Now, do you see,
thank you, Not Near Mint, and thank you, Not Near Mint.
Even comedy, HBO sort of popularized putting comedy specials on the air, and now with Netflix, stand-up comedy has become a big thing for them. Bringing back, they throw tons of money at people like Dave Chappelle and bring them back and relaunching them, and I think comedy specials, whether they're on YouTube or you can watch bite-sized comedy. I've always loved stand-up comedy, and I think I loved it when I saw Bob Fosse's Lenny, when I didn't know who Lenny Bruce was. And it's interesting, we've got The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, where Lenny Bruce is a character. There's a whole new group of people that is Lenny Bruce a real guy? Yes, he was, and I think that nowadays there's more opportunity for people that are industrious and want to get their work out there.
Without a doubt, the distribution, you couldn't get distribution. Remember back then, like when I started, there was 3 networks. That was it. 3 and HBO. And then Showtime came. But that was it. That was it. And if you didn't get on one, and you were on the bad side of somebody, the whole goal was, as a stand-up comic, was to get on the Johnny Carson show. That was it. 6 minutes. But if the booker didn't like you, or he didn't think Johnny might not like you, you didn't get on. And you had Merv Griffin. You had other talk shows. You had Merv Griffin, Dinah Shore, Mike Douglas. But the big prize was Carson. But nowadays, those shows are pretty, Tonight Show, they're not, first of all, they don't gear themselves towards stand-up comics anymore. But they're not it's nice to be on them, but you don't have to be on them. It's like, you're like you said, the Comedy Central and Netflix and all of them now, but Prime, all of them. Well, there's so many more, and YouTube, and that's the great thing. It's become much more a little democratic than it was before, and that's a great thing. That is a great thing, and that's something. That's one of the great things about technology. Technology has its pros and cons. I mean, it doesn't mean, by the way, you can get distribution out there. That's a great thing. Doesn't mean comedy's better. It doesn't mean the stand-ups are better, but there's better. Same thing in modern medicine. Modern medicine is better than it's ever been before, right? We can do shit. Doesn't mean healthcare is better. Right. Movies, special effects are so far better than they've ever been before. Doesn't mean storytelling is better. It's like, so don't, technology is going to get better. But technology, remember, is one more degree away from, human contact. Doesn't mean it's better. Doesn't mean it's worse. It just is.
Now, okay, I got one more question. We're coming to this. Has been so much fun, by the way, talking to you. For longevity. I mean, obviously, you've had a career that's lasted a long time. I've been working in Hollywood now for almost 30 years, and there's an attrition rate. Sometimes there's times when I, want to scoop my eyeballs out with a teaspoon because it gets so frustrating. If somebody wants to make a go of it and keep their career going, you've been going for a long time now. What are some of the things? Do you have any tricks? Like when a day comes along and you're just like, I'm out. I'm so through with this. How do you go? How do you keep going another day? And I think I'm asking this more for myself. You've stayed in the game for a long time, and what has kept you going? Like, what's your secret? How do you still do it?
I'll be frank with you here. I mean, I thought I've been out for about 15 years now, so I really have. I said, okay, it's over for me. It's like there's not a lot happening right now, but I'll just do what I do, and and I've been fortunate to do really well, and so I'm enjoying life. And I also always, and then something comes along. Jason Reitman calls me up to do The Princess Bride. I did a movie 2 years ago that I did one scene in, and what came out this summer on, I think it's called, what's it called? Sheila? Is that the name of it? Sheila? Which is Shirley. I'm sorry, Shirley, about Shirley Jackson with Elizabeth Moss. Got a lot of praise.
Right.
Came along. They call me. I just did an American Dad this week. So I mean, but I always think I go on doing what I want to do. I write. I'm always writing. I'm always doing something, whether it's sports oriented or it's comedy oriented, or just. And if somebody wants to pay me for it, that's fine. They want to. But as far as how did you do it? You have to have good people around you. That's the first thing. And I've been good and bad about that. And you've got to keep throwing punches. You got to keep yourself out there. And which I haven't done that well, but again, you gotta love it, and like, and here's the one thing I remember being in theater when I was in college, and my teacher, who had a tremendous impact on me, said something. He goes, if you love theater, and by that I'll say show business or entertainment, if you love it, if you can't be the best actor or a great actor or a great writer, you can be a great audience. And so I've always strove to be a great audience. I want to see people. There was a memorial service for the late, great Carl Reiner this week, which was as good a piece of entertainment as I've ever seen. I think it was on Zoom, but boy, they had everybody from Carl. They had Rob Reiner.
I can only imagine. My God.
Albert Brooks and Mel Brooks and Billy Crystal and you name it. And it was great. But Carl Reiner was so supportive of young comics and young, comedy writers. And by the way, a lot of comics aren't. Comedians are not. They're pretty competitive people for the most part. But then so are actors. So are filmmakers. That's everybody. That's just human nature. But I always thought I'm going to be a pretty great audience. I want to support people. I want to support young people. I help them because they're the next wave, and I'd like to see them go in a good direction. And it's not going to be my direction. I can lead them on to certain things they should look at. I think trying to get my goddaughter to watch a black and white movie is nearly impossible.
I know,
and that's a shame. And that is a real loss. That is such a loss. That's so silly.
But I do believe that there's hope, because some people, I think younger people are rediscovering certain things. But listen, we're coming to the end of our hour. I just want to thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. It was such an honor to speak with you, sir.
Oh, Robert, thank you.
And I've been such a fan of yours, and the fact that you gave of your time. The Mainframe Comic Con, by the way, this is the third one they've done, and they've asked me to come back and have these conversations. And I've been able to talk to people that I've admired for a long time, and I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us today and being a part of all this.
I have to say, when Chuck started to introduce the show, and he said, well, I'm so happy to have this, I'm waiting to go on. And he says, I am so happy to have this guy on. He's been there 3 years in a row. And I'm thinking to myself, did I do this show last year? And he goes, please welcome Robert. And I go, I'm losing it. And then I said, oh my God, thank God. Because my mother-in-law's got dementia. My father-in-law died of Alzheimer's. It's like my brother-in-law just, and I thought, holy shit, I'm losing this thing right now. And oh, by the way, I will be doing meet and greets tomorrow. Next week for Comic-Con. And I want to thank everybody involved. It's a good cause. Give what you can, enjoy it. I'm happy to have been part of it.
Well, thank you for being here. And it's a very well produced show too. I'm sure they're going to cut in and cut us off anytime. But until then, it's been a fantastic hour of conversation.
Best of luck to you, Robert.
And best of luck to you, sir. And I can't wait to see. I want to see that Elizabeth Moss movie, because it looks great. I didn't realize that you were in that. So
blink, you miss me.
Well, I can't wait to see it, because I'm a huge fan of hers.
Well, she's good.
I really enjoy her. So I guess they're going to take us off.
Okay, get out of here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.